My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here with Danny McGeough. It's June 13th, 2025, and we're at Flor Wines in Portland. Danny, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
First question, why wine?
I think because it just sparked an interest in me. I didn't think I was ever going to get into this, but all it takes is a bottle, and I think there was a gateway wine. I was working in restaurants, not like seriously yet, but I think once I started understanding, kind of how wine, food, places connect, I really got excited and interested about it. And the wine director of Higgins, Andy Zalman at the time, just kind of saw me take an interest and, mentored me, kind of took me under his wing a little bit. Whenever something good was open, somebody was drinking something, whether it would be a great Oregon Pinot or a Bordeaux or a Burgundy, he'd bring me a taste of it, and I kind of slowly became more and more enamored with wine. I think, honestly, the first bottle of wine that I can remember was a Bordeaux that I really got excited about. And of course, tastes change and evolve, and I wouldn't say that I don't reach for Bordeaux that often these days. Not that I don't appreciate it, but I think Higgins restaurant in the mid-aughts is where I got my spark for passion for wine. Nice. So yeah.
Tell me about life before wine a little bit. Tell me where you were born and raised.
I was born and raised in Perth, Western Australia. So I'm actually an Australian. I spent my childhood in Perth. My mom went to school actually in Russia. She studied at the Pushkin Institute, and so she, was interested in Russian literature. So we actually ended up moving there. So in the 90s, I lived in St. Petersburg, in Russia, and then as romances happened, my mother met a Portlander, and he was a traveling musician, a jazz musician. I actually played with the Mel Brown, kind of a famous Portland jazz group, Mel Brown Sextet, but we ended up moving here. They got married, and that's where my restaurant career started here. So I went to high school here, went to Cleveland High School, and actually Higgins was a place where an Australian friend, John, I think he still works there, John Attrell, Silver Fox. He's the guy who got me in the door at Higgins. And then that's where I worked there for, I think, 6 years total, maybe 6.5 years. But that's where the wine journey started. So I had worked in restaurants before Higgins, but it wasn't, something, I didn't do it because I cared. I did it because it was a job. And I think Higgins was the first place where I saw that you could make a career out of it, and where I got serious about, learning and studying. So, yeah.
So tell me about that as you kind of had that realization of wine as something you could do. As you had the realization of wine as something you could do, or restaurants as something you could do. Tell me about starting to kind of learn it out from that angle. Yeah,
well, I think I'd seen, winemakers come through the restaurant, and, I kind of saw the network that Andy Zalman had built. It's similar to, one of the things I think that was special about Higgins was the farmer network that Greg created, which on the food side, he basically brought seeds back of things he wanted grown, and he had, these farmers growing things that were more exciting, whether it be, a certain type of, radicchio or, really nice leeks or whatever it may be. And I think wine kind of had a similarity to that. There's a lot of, Willamette Valley winemakers who make wine that's so suited to the food around here, whether it be salmon or wild mushrooms. I mean, those are two classic examples of things that just go with Oregon Pinot. I think a lot of people kind of say if it goes together, if it grows together, it goes together. And I think it is very true in Oregon. I think the Oregon wines, whether it be textured Pinot Gris or, lean Chardonnay or just like earthy Pinot, it's perfectly suited to what's abundant here, And I think tasting, a lot of it's just tasting good wine, but I think figuring out having like a salmon dish and tasting, like Cameron, Oregon Pinot with it, and having little fireworks go off. It's exciting finding perfect food and wine pairings, which, as somms or, wine professionals, that is, sometimes you want people to just enjoy the wine, even if it's, red wine and oysters. It doesn't go together, but if that's what they like, good for them. I'll make that happen. But I think it's really, if people trust you and you can steer them into something unusual or just something that they don't normally go for, I think that's a really enjoyable aspect of the job. Kind of making these experiences happen for people that they might not otherwise, enjoy. And I started seeing that at Higgins, and learning more about Oregon wine and the different vintages. I remember tasting, Domaine Drouhin wines and Soder wines in the 05, 06 vintages. And I actually went on a trip to Australia. I went back for the holidays, and I ended up, they make these, it's basically like wine protectors. They look like bubble wrap kind of sleeves, but I packed away some of my favorite Oregon wines, and took them to Australia. We were at a barbecue there, and I opened some of these. It's wines that weren't available in Australia, for sure. Like Soder Mineral Springs, I believe it was 06 vintage, and like Domaine Drouhin Lorraine. So I had these wines, and I shared them with some Aussies, and it was fun watching them have holy shit moments. They're like, whoa, I didn't know Willamette Valley wine could taste like this. So I think that also got me excited, seeing the appreciation, in Australia. And this was the guy who was freaking out over these wines, had like a cellar full of, first growth Bordeaux and, the top tier old world wine. And I think I came back being like, whoa, the Willamette Valley is, if it's impressing these guys, like there's something to it. So I think, after coming back, I spent some more time at Higgins and, learned as much as I could. Andy sponsored me for the Guild, the introductory course. So I kind of got my start there, but I eventually left Higgins and went to Paley's place, which is also kind of an iconic Oregon, no longer around. Vitaly and Kimberly are in Hawaii. They earned it, but I worked there for a little while too. Worked there for maybe around a year and a half, and then I would frequent Le Pigeon as a diner. It was definitely, it kind of slowly became, it was a little more avant-garde, maybe more pushing boundaries, a little richer, a little less classical, I guess, and lots of Burgundy too, which is the other gateway wine drug that I almost wish I didn't discover because it's expensive, but working there, so it's, I guess Andy Zalman, I would definitely say, is my original mentor, and then, from one Andy to another, Andy Fortgang hired me at Le Pigeon, and I think at Le Pigeon is where the wine bug really bit me. Like, I don't want to say obsessed, but I'll say it. I became pretty obsessed, and I think Burgundy, Champagne, kind of, Riesling, those type of things really. I got to taste some great ones there, and also the menu changed a lot there, and the food is kind of often difficult to pair with, but Gabriel definitely builds flavors, and the dishes are pretty balanced already, so sometimes finding the wine to fit in there is challenging, but it's also really rewarding. Like some of the pairings that I came up with, or Andy came up with, or staff came up with there really blew guests' minds, and I think I would say Le Pigeon's where I really tumbled down the rabbit hole.
So before we get back to Le Pigeon, tell me about sort of, you mentioned, Higgins and Paley's place, pretty legendary places. Tell me about sort of what you learned there about fine dining, about what sells wine, about how to pair, kind of what were the lessons learned?
Yeah, I think Higgins really taught me about, it's a well-run place. And I worked every front of house position you could. I bartended there. I started bussing tables. Then it's one of those places where they didn't, maybe now they do, but they didn't really hire for like servers. Yeah, everyone had been there forever. It's like a place where, people work for years. So you could get your foot in the door as a busser, and then eventually prove yourself, and they'd make you a lunch waiter. And then after that, if you did all right, they'd maybe make you a dinner waiter. And then you could cocktail, bartend, whatever. So I did everything. I hosted, and I think I just seeing how a restaurant operates and seeing the value in each role. Dishwasher is probably one of the most important positions in a restaurant. If you work in a restaurant with no dishwasher or with bad dishwashers and things back up, you'll realize real quick how important it is. But yeah, I think seeing at Higgins the well-oiled machine nature of a place that's run well, it's impressive. It's team sports. A lot of people working together to make it happen. And there's something about, I think, especially the camaraderie that exists in a restaurant. You get through a busy shift, you sit down and have a beer after, 280 cover night, making guests happy and, doing a good job. There's something pretty you worked, You get sweaty, you work hard, and it feels rewarding. So I think that Higgins definitely taught me that. Paley's place, I would say, kind of fine-tuned. Kimberly's, I don't think it's any secret that she's a difficult person to work with, but she made me better for sure. And Vitali's food's great too. It's very, he went to Juilliard, so I think his kind of musicality comes through in the food. And also, I think he started, especially later in Paley's, kind of digging deep and bringing his Russian flavors out, which we also kind of connected about. I think he was pretty stoked to have a guy who spoke Russian working at his restaurant. So, I'd say Paley's definitely fine-tuned me. And then at Le Pigeon, tasting menus, that kind of thing, pairing lots of wine. You have to, if you're serving a 7-course tasting menu and pairing 7 wines and telling people where they're from, telling those stories, it's kind of a lot. And you do. It's a smaller restaurant, but still the intensive nature of kind of descriptions and storytelling. I think often people, like a good server sometimes feels a bit like an actor because you get animated and you're trying to bring people into this story. And I think working there, that kind of made that aspect of it. You're putting on a show every night. So I think there's something really, really fun about that. The hospitality it's such a interactive experience, and I think that restaurants, just along the way, you always learn what you can glean. Every bit of experience gives you something, and you take it with you and bundle it, put it into your next effort. Le Pigeon, I worked till 2019, and after that, there was a new restaurant opening in town. So Earl, who has all the Thai restaurants, Long Bon, I'd been a diner at all those restaurants, and Andrew Mace, he was the sous chef at Le Pigeon for a number of years, but he was leaving and opening a restaurant with Earl, and basically I left Le Pigeon to be the wine director at a place called Lazy Susan, which opened basically in the pandemic. It was hard, but it was a really fun experience and quite rewarding, but hard because it was probably the worst time ever to open a restaurant. It's still a restaurant. It's a Thai place now, like a Thai Chinese place. But that was a pretty fun moment, and learned a lot. You learn from your successes and from your failures, that kind of thing. And I wouldn't say it was a failure, but the restaurant is no longer open. So yeah, and Andy, when he was opening Flor, he called me on the phone and basically described what the idea for the shop was. And the idea for this shop came out of the pandemic, basically. This was opened in 21, and Le Pigeon, during the shutdown, had a big cellar of wine that they were sitting on. And as a way to kind of stay in touch with the guests, they started building these packs where it would be, like Thanksgiving wines or, holiday wines or, lasagna wines. They were doing like takeout lasagna. So I think the idea of kind of staying in touch with the guests, but also making these kind of wine, packs, that's what snowballed into the idea for this shop. And I think also a lot of it's, if you go into a record store and like someone has a record on that you might not have heard unless you walked into a random record store and you're like, ooh, what's that? Kind of that idea, but for wine, like having things open, whether it's like a Sylvaner that's like really better than it should be, or some kind of obscure grape that Soms are like, oh, cool, that's, it's from Friuli, it's like, orange wine. Getting people onto those type of things is a big part of what we do here, is, showing them new grapes and, introducing them to little pockets of regions that are nerdy, and we're the nerds to do it. So that was the idea. And it's definitely, it's a fun shop in that sense. You can come in here and, drink something off the shelf that's great. Or you can taste whatever glass pours exist, or you can go into the cellar and find some Oregon history. Like there's a bunch of Oregon wine in there right now from the 90s. There's like some Edelsheim. If you want to bring a bottle, I think that's like 98. So there's like, we always have some cool aged wine in here, or, fresh stuff. But either way, it's a great introduction for novices, or, people that know quite a bit. They come in here and are like, oh shit, I didn't know about this grape. But yeah, so I've been at this shop since the beginning. I was the first employee. So Sergio and Andy hired me, and while doing that, also was working at Kennard. I helped the Oregon City one when it first opened. I went out there and kind of, worked alongside the opening team and worked there for a few months, and then I went to Ringside. So I now work at Ringside. Fortunately, there was a fire and they're closed till probably late July, we'll see. But so yeah, I do this. I work at Ringside serving, and I'm the beverage director at Maurice, a little cute pastry, Norwegian French luncheonette is I guess what I would call it. So busy guy.
The kitchen fire gave you a little bit of a break, it sounds like.
It did, actually. It's been, the whole staff is still, the insurance is taking care of everyone, so we can hit the ground running when it opens. So I've had actually a nice little summer. Got to hang out and see my partner more often than I normally would. Spent a lot of, date nights lately, which is great. But I did actually, Kristen, the chef at Maurice, she just went out of town to work on kind of like a cookbook. So she went to Germany, which that's where her photographer, editor, printmaker lives, and they spent 2 intensive weeks together. And I hopped in the kitchen at Maurice, so I did a little kitchen stint, which I've always wanted. I'm a decent home cook, but I've always wondered what it would be like to cook in a restaurant. So it's actually, yesterday was my last day cooking.
And how did it go?
It was great. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Very difficult. I've always had nothing but respect for kitchen back of house, but humbling. Humbling. Yeah, long hours. Sometimes there's definitely some places have a back of house versus front of house mentality. A lot of places, the best places don't. I think the Pigeon there was a good camaraderie. Honestly, Higgins, most of the places I've worked have had good camaraderie, and I think that's part of the reason that I've learned a lot about cooking from all the restaurants I've worked at, watching Gabriel make something and asking a few questions, why'd you do that? And he'll tell you. You'll be like, oh, that's a cool technique. So if you got to be curious, and most wine people are, and I think finding out about cooking too all along the way, and wine, they're in cahoots. Wine and food are always together. So learning a little bit about cooking is great, and yeah, getting to do a little stint in the kitchen was pretty fun. Like I said, humbled.
What was the biggest surprise?
I think the biggest surprise was, Maurice is an open kitchen, so you're talking to people as well. It's not just cooking. There's places in Ringside, there's some swinging doors, and you get back there, it's kitchen world. You're not talking to guests, but Little Pigeon, open kitchen. Maurice, also open kitchen. Higgins, open kitchen. So a lot of those type of places, guests are gonna come up and ask you questions. And I think trying to maintain your flow and cook while also chatting up some tourists who are, having a nice lunch it's hard. You'd be like, oh, I burnt my toast. I had to talk to these people about where else to eat in Portland. So that kind of thing, the multitasking nature of that is like I said, I'm humbled, and I see people that do it every day are rock stars.
So let's talk about sort of your wine education a little bit. You mentioned obviously the Somm Guild early on. What did you find as you were learning about wine? What did you find was the best way for you to learn about wine, and what did you find was exciting about learning about wine?
I think there's definitely great books out there to read. Like Clive Coates has some great books on Burgundy. Jancis Robinson, all those books, they're important, and I think that reading is great. And everyone getting interested in wine should read. There's a number of books that everyone should read, but also I think tasting is the most important. I think that it's like I mentioned what Andy Zalman would do, bring me, and he oftentimes wouldn't tell me what it was too, and we just talk about the wine in the context of structure, tannins, fruit, acid, all that kind of thing. And I think it's helpful to blind taste. I actually was Andy had a tasting group at the time. I guess it would have been when I worked, I think, around the Paley's place time, Higgins Paley's place time. And I got to blind taste wines with a number of professionals. Erica Landon of Walter Scott was in the group. Stacy Gibson was in the group. Anthony Garcia, who used to be a somm about town, he sat for the master's test, I think, at least once. He was one of the guys who, watching him blind taste wines and nail them I was like, holy shit, you can do that? And he would get it it would be correct vintage, maybe the producer wasn't right, but he'd name the vineyard, and I was just like, oh my God, how did you do that? I think, those getting in a tasting group with people that are better than you will raise you up pretty quick. I think oftentimes when people are talking to a wine professional and the wine professional describes a wine as they're tasting it, and they get to put their finger on, oh, okay, that's what that is. Syrah tastes like olives pretty often, and I think finding the words. It's all about a vocabulary. There's wine's a language, just like anything, and I think making those associations comes with blind tasting, and also with just tasting with people who are more experienced. So I think that's really helpful, and just every opportunity you get to whether it is go on a trip to the valley, go tasting at wineries, learning about their history, or even just checking out a new restaurant that has a list focusing in a specific type of wine. Jump on every opportunity. When they present themselves, I think it's important to take advantage of it and glean what you can from everything. So
tell me about translating that into selling wine to customers.
Well, selling wine to customers. I think that people oftentimes have an idea of what they like, and I think if you can build trust pretty quick, then they're more likely to follow you wherever you want to take them. And I think that being personable, and also being it doesn't need to be the most expensive thing. I think if sometimes somebody will want something that maybe costs a decent amount of money, but if what they're eating maybe would go better with something a little less money, and that's technically not good for you, but in the long run it is good for you, because you build trust right there, and you're like, actually you should do this. I think it'll be better with what you're eating. I think this is actually the right wine. There's great ways of making that sale feel good for them, but I think oftentimes that builds trust, and people come back to restaurants. The Portland's full of neighborhood restaurants, and everyone has their rotation, and they're going to come back and see you. And if you steer them the right way once, they're pretty likely to come back. And there's regulars that I wait on that they'll whatever I want to sell them, they're into it. They've had enough good wine, courtesy of my suggestion, that they're like, you know what, keep them coming. White, red, pink, let's go.
So you talk about that kind of the building trust. I'm curious about, you mentioned earlier sort of the challenge of being an actor or being a storyteller.
Yeah.
Tell me about, I guess, learning the story from your end, and how to take someone's wine story and translate it into what a customer would care.
I mean, I think there's usually, especially if you meet the wine, there's usually some anecdotes. It might not even be wine related, like the juice itself. It might be something to do with the winery or, the winemaker. There's always a little anecdote that I think helps make it more human, more personal. I mean, knowing the soil type, the region, all that type of stuff is great. And I think, a lot of wine professionals have these spiels down that I think it feels a little bit like a tech sheet sometimes. And I'm like, chances are this person doesn't give a shit that it's limestone soil. Like, that doesn't really translate to the experience. But knowing that, the winemaker was into paragliding and like had some kind of, crazy thing happen, that might be something that's more memorable. So I think finding something memorable for yourself about the wine that you find amusing or interesting, and passing that on sometimes is pretty rewarding, because it'll also make them remember that. So there's definitely little things, like anecdotes that I've passed on. The guests remember that, and they're like, what was that one thing where the guy, like they remember the story that you told that was maybe not so wine related. It might not be about, like I said, the soil or the vintage. It might be more about like the people. So I think just connecting it with the people, because there's, the people behind everything, like winemakers and, the farmers and the makers of the wine they're really interesting people. And, you go out and talk to them, and there's always something great that you can bring back and tell the guests that will, enrich the experience. So.
Tell me about building a wine list. Obviously, you had multiple roles as wine director, beverage director. What makes a good wine list?
I think a good wine list is, I think it doesn't have to be concise. It can be long or short, but I think having a good spread of different styles and different price points. I think it doesn't have to be, natural leaning. I think these days everyone there's these sides being picked where people are like, this is only natural, or, no sulfur. Like, if it comes from good farming and, you like it and it tastes good with the food, that's, the most important thing. I mean, Lazy Susan was a place it was a grill, we had a custom charcoal grill built. So a lot of the food had this char to it. So for me, as I would, taste wines, I would always like, what goes good with charred meat, And it would often be, these wine, like Portuguese reds or something. So I think finding what goes with the cuisine is important. And also, Maurice, for example, is a lunch place. So I try to go, it's only open for lunch. So I try to go with lower alcohol wines. So a lot of the things I have will be like 10, 11% little, I like to call them lunch wine, like something you could have a glass of and you could go back to work, that kind of thing. So I think just, pairing it to the food, but also having the list speak to the place, I think is important. I mean, like Le Pigeon is pretty French-centric. There's always some local wines too, but Gabriel's food is definitely rooted in like French, French technique, French flavors, foie gras, offal. It's always been like a meat, a temple of kind of meat. Mm-hmm. And there's always going to be some, Andy's a total Burgundy guy. I mean, as am I, he made me one too. But Burgundy and Gabe's food is just good together. Like Pigeon and Gevrey Chambertin, come on. Yeah. So yeah, like it should be good with the food. That's the, the most important thing, I think. The wine's good with the food, and you can have, a $45 bottle, an $80 bottle, or a $200 bottle, and it'll all go good. I think that's important.
So when you're building a list like that, what's the discovery process for you?
Well, you taste with people, distributors. So I think a lot of it, there's going to always be, like, I would say, like with this shop, for example, there was wines that were just going to come in because, like, the three of us that were here at the beginning, we love, there's wines we love, like those have to be here. Like, Walter Scott, I think I've had that on every list because I love the people behind it, and the wines are, fantastic Oregon wines. But I think that, when you taste with distributors, there's different reps. Portland has some amazing reps. There's guys and gals that are so knowledgeable about the regions that I would say Bonnie Crocker, for example, with PDX, she's been to Spain so many times, and like Iberian wines, she knows better than anybody. And just getting to sit down with her and talk about, Spanish wines or sherry, you will learn so much. So I think listening to your reps, your distributors, and tasting as much as you can. And when you love something, sometimes there's not a lot to go around, so just, go for it. Buy it before somebody else does.
Give me an example of something you've discovered recently that you were excited about.
I am pretty into Alpine Nebbiolo right now. So I love, Nebbiolo's great, Barolo and Barbaresco is delicious, but there's kind of above Lake Como, like Valtellina, Lombardy, they call Nebbiolo Chavanesca up there, and they're a little less tannic, a little more like juicy, high-toned, red-fruited, kind of like, cranberry pomegranate-y kind of qualities to them, and they are just delicious and like chuggable. But also a lot of effort goes into making those wines. Like these, vineyards, seeing the pictures of them, it looks like, the people that pick those grapes are like rock climbing while they pick the grapes, and it's wild. It's there's a producer that they just describe their winemaking as heroic winemaking, which I kind of love. I'm just like, well, yeah, like that's hard work. And then you taste the final product and you're like, whoa, this is just delicious, like something that'll slip away quickly. So I would say that's great. I would also say I'm pretty into Eastern European wine right now. There's I think there's kind of a renaissance happening there. My better half, she works at Kachka, and so we both bring wine home, and I'll often be bringing home, something from here. It'll be like something pretty polished and like some Burgundy, or Loire Valley white, something like that. And then she'll bring like a Georgian orange wine that dries your mouth out, and we're just like, it's fun tasting, completely different things. So I think, Eastern European wines. There's a lot of cool Austrian stuff happening right now too. Austrian reds. I think people often think about like Riesling and Gruner, but Zweigelt, Saint Laurent, those are fun grapes. I'm into that. I'm a big champagne guy, and I've slowed down on it because it's not getting any cheaper, but I do love champagne. So, and there's so many different styles too. So whatever I discover, I always kind of come back, you circle back to a few things that you like always. So I always enjoy a bit of champagne.
So you mentioned earlier kind of the thought behind the creation process for this store. Tell me about how it's grown since you've been here. What are the changes? Well,
the staff, I'm still here, but there's been a number of people that have come and gone, and I think everyone brings a little bit of themselves to the shop. And I think that this place is definitely, it's such a neighborhood feeling place. Like you come in here on a Saturday around 4, you'll probably see a few of the same people every week. Mm-hmm. So I think it's definitely grown into this fun little community. Gaston and I, he's one of the guys that works here, we have a group of guys that come, and the first time it happened kind of organically. Everyone was just, let's open, this and this and this. And we have like a fun little kind of tasting situation happening where all the guests would open a bottle of something kind of similar. And it became like that's happened a few times. And I think that's kind of the fun nature of this shop, is that it encourages spontaneity in that way. Mm-hmm. And so, one person will order a cheese plate and share it with everyone, and you'll have these fun wines open. And I think that wasn't the case in the beginning, but it's evolved to that. And also just people coming in. There's a couple that comes in and plays dominoes here, which I love, because it's such an airy shop, and you can they'll drink a bottle of something cold and play dominoes for an hour, meet a friend here, and then go have dinner. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a lot of the kind of idea of the shop was to. It's not a wine bar per se, so it's not like a place where you sit and have a flight. It's more of a place where you come and have a glass and maybe shop while you're enjoying your glass. And it's smart to give people a glass of wine and then send them into the fancy room. I've seen people a number of times down some champagne and be like, screw it, I'm going to buy a case of this. So we're all about encouraging that here.
And you mentioned the kind of the unique design of this place. Tell me about, I guess, how it's designed to feel?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the group that did it, Osmos, her name's Andy, Andy Hess. She's very talented. They've done a number of restaurants in town. They actually designed Lazy Susan and Ava Jean's, which is a beautiful space. But I think that Andy and Sergio just kind of gave her the feeling that they wanted for this place. There's, I mean, if you look up there, there's those pieces. They're Japanese style. So it's a guy's named Nicholas Dowdy. I think he's been in food and beverage forever, but they're all over the appropriate section. So that's like Rhone, right next to the Rhone section. That's actually a view of the gorge. That's from the Oregon side to the Washington side. So you're basically looking from Mosier to kind of like white salmonish area with kind of like a New World, kitchen-y vibe. And then there's Burgundy over there, right above the cave. So I think that kind of, a lot of the feeling and the emotion of the regions is kind of presented in the shop nicely. So you're a little connected to the place via these beautiful little pieces. But I think that and just the tall ceilings, it's pretty airy, and you could feel like you could hang out here for a nice little while. I think a lot of shops, I'm not gonna name any names, but you go into the shop and there's just boxes everywhere, and there's a grumpy guy behind a computer who looks kind of pissed off that you're there, and that's super what we're not going for. Like the idea here, I mean, the name Flor, it's a sherry, making term, but it's also kind of, there's a double entendre there with, if you're a Som, you're on the floor. So we're all of us here have the restaurant background, and I think that restaurant hospitality in a wine shop is pretty unique. Giving people basically, so many times people come in here with dinner in mind. We're making chicken, roasting a chicken. What should we have? And in a restaurant, you get to pair the wine and the food, and you see the pairing happening. You see them eating it and drinking. Here, it's you got to kind of imagine. You got to imagine what their dinner is going to be like, and pair the wine with the food like that. So it's kind of a different type of pairing.
You've obviously talked about hospitality earlier, and I appreciated your take on it, kind of the give and take of it. Tell me about how you've come to understand hospitality and how you sort of define it to yourself and to people working with you or for you.
Yeah, I mean, hospitality, it's I think that it's the most kind of innate part of restaurants is, your people are you're taking them into your home of sorts, and kind of, giving them an experience that is, it's very much, it's very warm. I think a lot of it's, you're giving joy to people. A lot of times it's the best part of their day, even if you've had a bad day, watching people have, they've maybe had a difficult morning, but then they're finally sitting down and having this nice experience. Just making that, bringing it into focus just with warmth, and I think genuine hospitality. That's really what it's about to me. It's when guests leave and you see them really happy, that's that makes me happy. I love when you can give someone an experience that they will remember, and it'll probably bring them back when they have that kind of hospitality. I think you always want to go back and do that again. It's like a little vacation, A restaurant should be like a little vacation.
So I'm curious talk about consumers a little bit and sort of wine consumption trends. How have you seen things change since you've been selling wine in Oregon?
I mean, I think that there's less of a kind of a collector-y mentality. I don't think people are buying wine quite the same. I think people are oftentimes just want to enjoy it in the now. I think not as many people have cellars now, so I think that consumption has changed in terms of, people also don't always want to, Monday and Tuesday you want to drink something great, but you don't need to spend $1 million on it. So I think that the consumer is also really knowledgeable nowadays. I think that it didn't maybe. Social media and that kind of things changed the game quite a bit. There's just so much information out there. So I think that the consumer is pretty savvy nowadays. People, they know good values when they see them. They know good producers. So I think that in that sense, it's just it's a different market because there's so much information out there. It's available for everyone, you know, whether it's following Assam on Instagram and seeing what they're drinking and being like, I want to try that too. Like that kind of, I think that's made it made the wine world a little bit bigger. So I think in that sense, and especially in Portland, it's a pretty savvy consumer here. People they know like what to do. We help them, but they know what to do. So I think that's changed a little bit. I also think it's not just like Cabernet or, you know, I think that the grapes aren't as important now. Like it doesn't have to be a certain variety of wine. Like it can be a blend of things or, you know, like an obscure grape, and that's fine.
So how has that changed how you approach inventory and building lists?
I mean, I think that I'm more likely to put something weird on and have confidence that I could sell it. I think before you kind of be like, I have to have a Chenin Blanc, I have to have a blah, you know, but like, let's Ribola Jala, it's good, let's do it. I think that kind of aspect is interesting, just having. I mean, I think seeing people like Doug Tennell from Brick House at Higgins and just meeting the first few winemakers, they're pretty farmery type people, you know, like, I love seeing a dirty fingernail on a winemaker. You know, it's not a bunch of ascot wearing type guys. I mean, and I remember going to California too and just seeing how grand everything was. And Oregon feels more, you know, humble, which I love that about it. It actually feels like, you know, an agricultural area when you're out there. I mean, there's tasting rooms and it's definitely an industry, but it doesn't feel quite as, you know, like Napa. So I think that's part of the reason that I was so drawn to the Oregon wine industry is it's got like, there's a humbleness to it. There's kind of a grassroots character. It's scrappy, and I think the wines are more interesting for it.
So as it's grown, have you seen the industry change? And if so, like what does the industry look like now in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed. I think that, you know, Chardonnay's having a moment, you know. I think people used to pull it out and plant Pinot, and Pinot Gris was like the white grape, and I feel like that's not the case anymore. I think that it's also, I think it's in a pretty good place right now. I think there's, you know, a lot of camaraderie, but I think everyone makes each other better. You know, like one producers will kind of achieve something with their wine. It seems like sparkling wine's having a moment in Oregon now too. So I think it's growing in terms of what different grapes are in vogue and also like what does well. And I mean, climate change has something to do with it, I'm sure. It's definitely, it's getting warmer, but yeah.
So let's talk about looking ahead for you. Obviously, you mentioned you're kind of doing 3 different gigs at the moment. Mm-hmm. What comes next for you? What are you looking ahead to, or what have you not done yet that you want to do?
I mean, I was just in the kitchen, so maybe I get a job as a dishwasher. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just I let it happen. I don't have any distinct plans to do anything different than I'm doing right now, but whatever opportunity presents itself, you know, we'll see.
Is there anything you haven't tried yet that you want to?
You mean like work or wine?
Either.
Like I said, dishwashing, maybe. I mean, I just cooked for a couple weeks. Maybe just give it the old, like, I'll do a night and see how it works. Wine-wise, I don't know. I mean, there's a few things that I've never tried that I want to, but you never know, it might happen.
So looking ahead to the future for Oregon then a little bit, the industry here, what do you see happening to the Oregon wine industry?
I mean, I think I'm excited to see what happens in the Gorge. I mean, the Willamette Valley, we know that better because it's more established, but I think in the Gorge, you know, I think it's a slightly different climate there, and I think different grapes, you know, do better there. So I think like Mosier, you know, white salmon, that kind of area, I think it'll be exciting to see what happens there because it's just beginning. And yeah, I think grapes like Aligote, I'm seeing more people work with that, which is cool. So I definitely think that it's, interesting things are going to happen in the Willamette Valley, but also, like we talked about Seven Springs earlier. That's a, historic vineyard, and things are changing there a bit now. So I think it's a fun pocket of the wine world to watch.
Some more locally then, obviously you mentioned the challenges of opening a restaurant during the pandemic, all the challenges that Portland restaurants and restaurants in general have had the last few years. Tell me about how the restaurant wine scene feels here right now and maybe where it's going.
I mean, it actually feels pretty good. I think there's a few new places that have opened that have great wine lists. Like I love McGeough is a new restaurant that has a really good wine list. And then there's La Chelle, the new French place. It was going to be Naomi Pomeroy's restaurant. Now Micah, her chef, is running it, but the wine list there is really good. So I think we're in a good place as far as restaurant lists go. I think exciting things are happening. I love going to all your, like the Pigeon, Davenport, all the places that have great lists, but it's cool to see the small new wine lists that are really good as well. I think it's an exciting time to be a diner here right now.
All right. All questions that I have for you.
Awesome.
Anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't
No, I think that was great.
cover? Excellent. Short, sweet. I like it.
I love it.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Of course, yeah, it's my pleasure.
Sharing the space again. It's nice to see it from this angle. Appreciate the time, and we'll let you off the hook.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.